Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Good afternoon, Joel. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. I can hear you. Thank you.
Great news. This is great. Fabulous news. Oh, that's great news. I feel better like when I know he's the only one presenting and like he has audio, you know?
hello.
Hello, Neil.
What a lovely wet day to have a nice bit of rain.
Chair Murphy, it is now 6 o'clock. You can call the meeting to order.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll call to order the Cotati Planning Commission meeting on November 1st, 2021. May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Hancock? Commissioner Moore?
Yes.
Here.
Vice Chair Lemus? Chair Murphy?
Here.
And Commissioner Rodriguez is absent today.
Thank you. We'll move into item C, which is approval of the minutes. Can I have someone make a motion to approve the minutes for June 21st, September 7th, and September 20th, 2021?
Some of these can't be approved because there's not enough people were at the meeting. So I want to say the first one, the June 21st, we need Sylvia, because Chair Murphy, you were gone and
I was gone.
Neil was gone.
Okay,
And I think that's for the other one also, because I was gone and Sylvia was gone on the 7th. So I don't think we have a quorum there. And let me look.
September 20th.
And unless Sylvia comes on, we don't have a quorum for the September 20th one either.
Okay.
I'm here. Are we checking to
Oh.
see which day
Oh.
he's here? Hi.
Just trying to figure out who is at what meeting and if we can vote on them.
Yes.
I know I missed a meeting along the way over the summer.
Let me look back.
That
Can-
was the
does
September
staff-
7th.
Does staff have any clarification on attendance? Just so we can confirm in writing.
This is Director House. I'm reviewing right now.
Okay.
If the commission wants to take items out of order, then I can be ready and come back to it. Or if you just want to give me just a couple minutes, I can provide some direction.
I'm comfortable taking items out of order if the commissioners are comfortable as well.
That's fine. Yeah, when I read the minutes, it just seemed like we were all at different meetings. So
Yeah, thank you very much for calling that out. I appreciate it. Commissioner Lemus and Commissioner Hancock, are you guys comfortable with moving on to item D?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll return back to this at the end of the meeting. So we'll move on to item D, which is changes to the agenda. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No changes, Chair Murphy.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item E, which is oral and written comment. If we can open it up to any oral or written comment, with a reminder to please limit your comments for items that are not agendized for tonight's discussion.
Chair Murphy, seeing no hands, we have no public comment.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll move into item F, matters at hand. And I believe we will be turning this over for staff to walk us through the consideration of this proposed ordinance.
Chair Murphy and commission members, that before you is a public hearing for proposed ordinance change to the city's ordinance regarding WUNF standards. And next slide, please. So I'll go over the history. You may remember, but back in May of this year, the Planning Commission held a workshop as part of the proposed objective design standards and open space standards. And staff proposed a menu of usable open space options. The VRNF was included as an option to help meet the requirements for providing common open space within a multifamily project. On June 21st of this year, the Planning Commission held a public hearing regarding the open space standards, and the Planning Commission voted to recommend approval of the WRNF option to the City Council. Next slide, please. On June 21st of this year, the City Council held a public hearing on the objective design standards and open space standards as recommended by the Planning Commission. The Council discussed the WRNF concept at length and continued the item to allow staff to address questions and issues raised by the Council regarding the WRNF as well as other proposed standards. Next slide, please. At the second public hearing held by the Council on September 8th of this year, the Council reached a consensus regarding the use of WRNFs within private development projects and voted to remove the WRNF as a usable open space option, and instead directed staff to prepare an ordinance to generally require WRNFs to be required within certain multifamily projects. Next slide, please. So that brings us to today, November 1st, in this Planning Commission public hearing. And as directed by the Council, staff has prepared draft standards, which are now before the Planning Commission for a hearing and recommendation to the City Council. So I will now discuss what a WRNF is and what it isn't. And as you may recall, as discussed back in May, the Burnif is also known as a living street and also a multi-use zone. And the general principles of a Burnif are how it's different from a regular street. It has a visible entrance, which is usually a sign, change in pavement. It has physical barriers. This is to force motorists to slow down, separate pedestrians as needed. Basically reduce the visual width of the street. And also this is a shared space, and the paved areas are used by both pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists can also use those. And the Vunif includes landscaping and street furniture. So it is a way to beautify and make use of the street. Next slide, please. So the Woonerf basically is a Dutch word, and this is an example of an existing Woonerf in the Netherlands. And generally, most Woonerfs are converted public streets. That's usually how they're seen. And this example is used because it kind of shows all the elements of a Woonerf, in that it has special paving that is differentiated between the parking spaces and the pedestrian way. But there's generally no curbs. Pedestrians and vehicles are usually the same space. In this case, it also uses bollards to separate some areas where you don't want vehicles to cross. This particular example includes parallel parking spaces, and they also include forced traffic calming, such as this chicane in the middle of this one, which is a slight curve to force vehicles to slow down. And you can see at the top of the photograph, you see where kind of a traditional public street is. And so generally there would need to be some kind of a transition or entrance at that location. Next slide, please. This shows an example of a Woonerf in the United States, and this is Batavia, Illinois. And these in the United States, these have generally been used in commercial areas to revitalize these areas to make them more walkable, pedestrian friendly. And in this case, the traditional street's been converted to a Woonerf through removing the curbs in a lot of locations, adding planters, adding seating, combining planters and seating. And also this has some pedestrian only areas, as well as pedestrians are free to walk in the street. So this is kind of the example you would see in the United States. Next slide, please. This is showing that same street from another angle. And in this photo, you can easily see how the planters are integrated into the street, as well as benches. And you can see that basically the street, the pedestrian areas and the vehicle areas can be combined. And it reads as one street that is shared. Next slide, please. This is an example in Santa Monica, California, where an existing residential street with mostly single-family homes has been converted to a Woonerf. Well, it includes Woonerf elements by integrating some landscaping, more decorative pavement. The street and the parking have different kinds of pavement. It makes the street look narrower and more walkable, and it slows traffic down. So it is a more walkable street. And I think in this particular case, this is basically a 2-block long street that has kind of been revitalized by conversion and using Woonerf concepts. Next slide, please. This is maybe a not so successful example of converting a street to a Woonerf in Houston, Texas, in a commercial office area. They've added the pavement, they've added a chicane, but it's really not a place you maybe would want to stay and socialize. There's no seating. It's not a very active space. So this is kind of an effort that some cities have tried to upgrade an existing street. Next slide, please. This was an example that was shown in your staff report in Minneapolis, where the local newspaper is asking, is this just a kind of a fancy parking lot? It uses some Woonerf standards with the pavement and some integrated landscaping, but it's basically, does not really have pedestrian elements. The cars still are the predominant feature of the street. And it's really, maybe can help with this street, but it really has not turned the street into what's called a Woonerf. It's really not a living street. Next slide, please. So what's before the commission is requiring VRNFs in new residential development. So this is something unique. I'm not aware of other cities that have done this. This is something the council did like the concept, and so they directed a staff to come up with standards to require them. So this is an example. You may have been out there. This is on East Cotati Avenue, the Tower Apartments. And in the center includes a street that is an essential part of the project that includes a lot of VRNF standards. It does have some decorative paving. It looks like pedestrians could use it as well as cars. It's not dominated by the cars, so it is. You can see it being a multi-use street. In the center, the curbs have been eliminated. Just out of the photograph is a small, to the left is a open space green with some seating. They have bollards on the right in a couple of locations to differentiate, to basically say that a car should stay out of that area. That's where the mailboxes are located. And there's lots of pedestrian activity in that one location. So in that case, they've separated the pedestrians from the cars. But this is a local case where a VRNF concept has been used within a multifamily project. So that's basically the kinds of projects that we are talking about this evening. Next slide, please. This is another view of the same project, showing what an intersection between a VRNF could look like between a regular driveway. And you can see they look quite a bit different and function quite a bit differently. The VRNF looks and acts more like a street or alley, where the parking area is basically looks like just a regular parking lot. So the concept is to require the VRNF concept to be included in generally most new multifamily developments as well as horizontal mixed-use developments. Next slide, please. So this is an aerial view of the same project on East Cotati, showing in the circled in blue is the central part of the project, which is the VRNF concept, and then around there is a perimeter driveway. So it shows how it's located centrally within the project, and basically complements the common open space within the project, and it can be used as common open space, even though cars are allowed to drive through it at slow speeds. Next slide, please. This is an example of a mixed-use project, horizontal mixed use in Washington, D.C. that's under construction. This concept could be used, let's say, in mixed-use developments in Cotati on the west side of 101, where there are proposals in the land use requires mixed-use development. In this particular case, the VRNF is also just a part of the project. It's a centrally located area located in the middle, circled in blue, which accesses parking, but there's other streets that carry most of the traffic. Next slide, please. This shows that same project, what it would look like. So this is an example of a VRNF. So the street that you see there can be used by pedestrians and vehicles, slow-moving vehicles, and at the end, there's a common courtyard with seating. In this particular case, this one uses curbing, and which the proposed standards before you generally would limit that. And this one does not have a lot of seating along it. It's mostly just at the end, so the proposed standards would require seating throughout the VRNF. Next slide, please. So one thing that's important to a VRNF is the entrance that needs to be clearly marked as an entrance, that this is a different zone where the speed limits are slower. So this shows an example of a VRNF that it's consistent with what's proposed here. It has a sign. It has, this one has a ramp up. It could be a chicane or something else that would force vehicles to slow down. There's a change in paving. You can see at the ramp up, the curb is then eliminated and it goes forward with a curbless design. It also uses bollards in some cases, separate pedestrians if needed, and it integrates landscaping. So this is, I would say, a good example of what's proposed in the standards before you tonight. Next slide, please. This is another example, and this is in the UK of an existing street that was converted to what they call home zones in the UK. That includes parking on both sides. The parking is, it's not continuous parking. It includes interruptions. It includes an entrance to slow traffic. It's narrower, and up ahead you can see there's a chicane where the road slightly curves and there's less parking. So the parking's intermittent. It uses special paving. It has an entrance. So these kinds of the features are things that are proposed in the ordinance that's before you tonight. Next slide, please. So I'll summarize what's in the proposed ordinance. This is from the staff report. So generally required for new multifamily and horizontal mixed-use developments that include a private internal driveway that provides vehicle access within a single project. So these are, to be clear, these are not proposed for public streets. These are proposed for private driveways within a development, within a single development. And it'd be included on driveways that function as a street or alley where the car should not be predominant element. And it's located in proximity to residential entries and common areas, as you saw in the two examples we've gone over. And there's a requirement for a minimum 100 square feet of VRNF be provided per unit. So it'd be total for the project. In the 100 square feet, there are no cookie cutter standards for these. So the 100 square feet is basically a number staff came up with based upon the tower apartment project. It has 50 units, and based on the amount of VRNF they include there, it's about 100 square feet per unit. It seemed like a reasonable number to include in this ordinance, but it's not a one size fits all. But based on that size of that project, that seemed like a reasonable amount. And since that's located in close proximity to Cotati, that project's actually in Roanoke Park, right next to the city limits, it seemed reasonable and realistic that would be something that could be done in Cotati. It shall include a clear and distinctive entrance with signage, change in pavement, and traffic calming features, as we've discussed. Next slide, please. This is something that was specifically talked about at the council. It was the transition between a street and the VRNF to make sure it was safe. So this ordinance proposes a transition that would vary between 20 feet to 60 feet between a VRNF entry and an intersection with another driveway or street. So the 20 feet of transition would be for a minor street or from another driveway. It could be 20 feet if the VRNF were off a major arterial, like in East Cotati Avenue. There would need to be at least a 60-foot separation between the street and the VRNF. And in all cases, you need a clear 20 feet of sight distance in front of VRNF entry, so cars can have time to see that this is something different. They need to slow down and are aware of the situation. It's not around a blind curve or anything like that. So there needs to be clear 20 feet of sight distance in front of the VRNF. Traffic calming measures need to be within the VRNF and with at least no more than 160 feet apart. So the 160 feet is not a magic number. The city of Anchorage, Alaska has come up with some standards for private streets, and that was a number they came up with, and it seemed reasonable that you want traffic calming, but it can't be so far apart that it doesn't actually calm traffic. So that was kind of a minimum standard to have that every 160 feet. An issue that has come up with various jurisdictions that have converted streets to VRNFs is emergency vehicle access. And so it needs to be clear that the fire marshal needs to clear, the design to make sure fire equipment and emergency vehicles can maneuver within and exit and enter the VRNF and provide for public safety reasons. Another standard staff is proposing is a minimum width of generally 24 feet, with it being greater in some locations to allow for amenities. So basically the 24 feet is coming from the necessary width for emergency vehicles, 2 cars to pass safely. And that's generally what you see in that example on East Cotati Avenue. That's in the 24-foot width range. So that would be kind of the minimum width that's being proposed. Next slide, please. Also, there's a maximum length that may not ever come up in a small town like Cotati, but the proposal is for 300 feet maximum length. And that's to preclude drivers from getting frustrated with having to go very slow over a long distance. So that's a standard. I think that was also from Anchorage, Alaska. That's a standard they developed. And also an important aspect is minimizing or eliminating continuous curbs, so it all reads as one space that is shared. And the next one is Vuner shall incorporate seating, landscaping, and other pedestrian and decorative amenities along its full length to promote common use of the space. So it's not just at one end or one location within the VRNF. So there's expected there would be amenities, landscaping, seating along the full length in various locations. Also was the decorative pavement. It can be pavers or stamped asphalt, colored concrete. That would need to be along the full width and length of the VRNF. And in some cases that you've seen, some of these VRNFs have parking and some do not. Generally on the conversion of streets, you will often see parking intermittent within the VRNF. In some cases, you may see parking adjacent to the VRNF. So the proposed standards would allow parking provided it's intermittent and it's not like a double loaded parking lot. In the example of Minneapolis, something that would need to be have gaps in it. And so the parking is not the predominant element of the VRNF. Next slide, please. I think that's a repeat, so we'll go to the next slide. So in conclusion, staff recommends that the Planning Commission conduct a public hearing and adopt a resolution recommending that the council amend the land use code to adopt Vuner Living Street multi-use standards for multifamily and mixed use developments. Next slide. Are there any questions of staff at this point?
Sorry about that. Had some trouble getting off mute. Okay, so we will open it up to questions and comments from the commission. And I see some hands, so I will start just down the list here. Commissioner Hancock.
Yes, hello. Thank you, very interesting. So as a multi-use, would that also include being able to not have, have stormwater aspects to it, perhaps be a concrete lattice work so that it's literally a living street with green growing through it? I mean, I think thinking of this for this area where we need infiltration. So that's one question that's on there. A second question would be, would this be appropriate for something like Windmill Farms Drive, should ever that come up? I mean, it's longer, I think, than 300 feet. So I'm just not sure as 300 feet, what would be driving that? Another sort of question about that, really flexibility. We're talking about, I think, flexibility for a developer as well as open space. Would this concept have fitted with the Frog Song setting, with the way they've got all of their parking on the side? It's a driveway off the road. So anyway, 3 questions to start off with. Thank you very much.
So I will answer the Commissioner Hancock's questions. So on the turf block, the staff did discuss that originally when this was discussed in the open space or the objective standards that went before the commission. The question that came up with turf block and multi-use is whether having children riding bicycles or playing ball, those kind of activities, whether that would work on turf block. So it was staff's position that it should be something smooth and flat, and so it could be multi-use. And with turf block, that seemed to be problematic, where you could get all those different types of uses. So that was a concern. So I would say the way that the ordinance was thought of as turf block would not be a good multi-use material, unless there's material. Maybe there's some turf block out there I'm not aware of, but with my experience, what I've seen, I would say I'm not picturing it being good for multi-use. The Windmill Farms, maybe Commissioner House or Director House has some information. I've not looked specifically at Windmill Farms Drive. The way the ordinance is written, there's some language at the very end that gives the commission and council some options to do something different. So there is flexibility built into the ordinance to allow variations from the standard. And the frog song, I've walked through the project. I think if it's kind of what I've seen as kind of a typical parking lot situation, I would say it would be difficult to have a VRNF where you have kind of open parking on both sides. If it looks like a street or an alley, then it would work. So if you had garages with garage doors where the garages are completely enclosed with doors, and you're not seeing continuous cars, that may work for a VRNF. But if it's just an open parking lot or with just open carports, I would say that would not be a good use for a VRNF to be located in those situations.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, I would just add a couple of things. So with the turf block, I think a turf block could function as parts of a VRNF. Parking spaces, absolutely. If it was a portion of part of the VRNF, no question. But for the continuous entire drive aisle, we would probably look to have some different materials provided. And then I do think that the Windmill Farms Drive would actually be too long under this ordinance. The part of the goal to limit the overall length is to avoid kind of driver frustration. You know, we want these to be intermixed spaces where bicyclists and pedestrians and vehicles all interact. And what we've seen through our research is that the overall length of them is intentionally limited, so a driver in an automobile isn't feeling overall frustration by that. Basically, they can see the end of this slowed down kind of meandering area that they're sharing the space with, so then they can get through that and then get onto the driveway. So it is intentional to limit their kind of overall length to avoid that issue. And I am not familiar with enough with Frog Song to be able to provide any additional feedback on that.
Thank you. I'll hold the rest of my questions till later.
Thank you, Commissioner Hancock. Commissioner Moore?
Yes, I had a couple questions. One is, if you look at the Tower Apartments, there's a stop sign right in the middle. And I wanted to say, is that typical of having something like this? Also, the speed limit, you keep saying lower speed limits, but there's not a speed limit that was actually said what the speed limit is on these. And for me, one of the other questions was, one of the pictures that you put, the cars were vertical parked. Was that a one-way? Because it didn't look like there was a two-way traffic on that one street. And then the other thing is the safety of these. You're going to have kids playing, people in and out with cars. It's definitely one of those things where it's going to be interactive. This is something new for Cotati. And what kind of, education is going to be going around this so that people absolutely know that they're not going to come in flying down one of these, at 25, 30 miles an hour and some kind of tragedy is going to happen. So those are my concerns. Those are my questions.
Okay, and the example, Commissioner, with the example with the stop sign, that is something, it's a Burbank housing project. So they had that stop sign is kind of what they're doing as how they're proposing an entrance, is that you stop at that point. So that stop sign they have there, they put in is how they've done that. That's basically say you come to the pedestrian only area. That's the area around the mailboxes. So that's kind of, before that you have an area where it's not really a VRNF, but it kind of leads you into it. So what's proposed here is there'd be a ramp up or a chicane and a sign, not necessarily a stop sign is not proposed, but there would be something different. So that's how that project is doing it, is with a stop sign. They've done another project over in Runner Park that has a similar situation where they have an open space courtyard that goes through the middle of a parking driveway with a stop sign on each side. So that's how that project is done, how they've done their entrance. In the ordinance, I didn't go over, but in the ordinance, there is a speed limit, and that's 8 miles per hour that would be marked. So in the ordinance itself, it actually shows an example of an entrance sign and with an 8 mile per hour sign as part of that. So safety is a concern that was discussed at council, and staff has looked at that. So basically the way that how safety is looked at in these is you try to force cars to slow down by putting in measures, the ramp ups, chicanes, the narrowing, the signs, the pavement, so people know that this is a different kind of area. I do live in a multifamily project in Santa Rosa where people do use the driveways. They're not burn-offs, and there's nothing special designed about them, where people are walking in them and kids are riding their bikes. And so the goal is that the thinking is that kids and people are doing this anyway in the driveway. So if we can design them so it's safer to use by using the forced measures to slow people down, that would make these existing driveways safer than if we just left them as they are. So that's the thinking. If you make it a special place, people will slow down. But yeah, there is no guarantees with these, but the thinking is these make it safer than just having a regular parking lot that kids are using anyway for bicycling and such. Does that answer the?
I wanted to say, is most of these one way, or are they both ways?
I haven't seen a pattern. It depends on the width of the street. I think the one in Houston that was kind of a bad example was a one way. It was a narrow street. The one in Santa Monica, I think it really. I haven't seen any. It depends on the width of the street. A lot of these are conversion of existing streets. It also depends if they have parking on one side or two sides. I think the ones in the Netherlands, which are pretty narrow streets, those are probably one way, at least for the motorists, maybe two way for bicyclists. So I don't think there's a common cookie cutter approach whether it's one way or two way.
I like that. I think that's a good feature in that maybe if it is intended to have two-way traffic, that there's areas where there's not enough room for two cars to pass. So it would just be another traffic calming measure that would be incorporated into it. And staff can look at that as we move forward with the ordinance.
All right, thank you. Those are my questions for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. Commissioner Lemus?
Yeah, so my question is there going to be some set criteria for the number of items or elements, such as benches or landscaping, per 100 feet? Is there going to be like some kind of preset criteria for that? Or I know you're trying to avoid continuous curb, but without kind of some preset criteria per 100 feet, I'm wondering what the thought is on that.
So in the standard, there's no basically it says there needs to be those features along the entire length. So it's not like you'd have a burn-off and just in the middle, you have the seating and landscaping. So if you have 100 square feet per unit along that entire length, you're going to need to have all the features of a burn-off. So that's the intent. There's not so many, there is not a standard for so many benches per 100 square feet, but there is criteria that they need to be included throughout the burn-off. But there is the way the ordinance is written, it would allow a flexibility for that to be proposed by the developer and for staff and the commission to review what they're proposing to determine if that's adequate or not.
Okay, so something we'd be able to kind of review ahead of time and say, well, it's not enough, or it needs more barriers or something. Yeah, so if a developer, when he comes in with a project, he would need to show the design of his burn-off. And he needs to show that he's meeting the purpose. So that's why at the beginning of the ordinance, it tells a lot about the purpose and how a burn-off should work. And there would be a judgment call by staff and the decision makers on whether it meets that intent. That's having enough features to slow traffic down, has enough amenities. So those things I guess there would be quite a bit of discretion needed to make sure, because there's not a cookie cutter approach. There's not a one size fits all. So it's going to be depending upon the size of the burner if they're using, and every site's different. So the goal was to allow flexibility in how they do that. Okay. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Hancock, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I mean, very interesting discussion, and as a new feature, it really does stimulate a lot of thinking. But in this case, I was wondering the difference between a driveway, which is something for a transition through, versus access to a parking space. I mean, because those to me seem to be the same thing, but it almost seems like there's a differentiation here that the way you were referring to it, I mean, from the flexibility, we're looking at flexible approaches. And so from the, why wouldn't we leave that up to the builder? So anyway, it's what's the difference between a driveway and the access to the parking spaces?
Yeah, there's not a big difference. So I think when I've said driveways before, some people think that sounds too much like it's for motorists only because you're driving a car. And access ways sounds like it's more open to everybody. So it's kind of, I just kind of using a different term to mean kind of the same thing. It's something, it's like generally I guess we generally refer to these as driveways. But also there are access ways for pedestrians and access ways to parking spaces. So I would say they're somewhat interchangeable, those terms.
Yeah, and I would just add how staff thought about it is the areas or the portions of a driveway or an access aisle that are close to residences' front and back doors are the places we thought these would be the most appropriate versus, you know, in a parking area that was maybe a far away from where folks are actually living and interacting. That's not an appropriate location for this type because it's going to be generally just serving the automobiles. And so rather than trying to say, you know, a driveway versus a drive aisle, we actually looked as to how they would be situated on the site for some of the specific criteria.
So we're looking at follow-up question here. We're looking at fairly small projects and it's all private. Why wouldn't we try and just leave it up to the flexibility within constraints of the developer for whatever they come up with, whether it be another co-housing group that might be very focused around minimizing the vehicles versus a developer that says, hey, I want to sell to people who will want to access their garage, their covered carport and stuff. Why would we want to try and differentiate too much between those?
Commissioner Hancock, I think the concept was, I think that one example in Minneapolis was showed is, you know, that's in your staff report about where it's just kind of a fancy parking lot. So I think what staff was trying to do is say, if it's an area that's dominated by the cars, it's basically a parking lot that we're not going to just kind of pretty it up and make a burn out of it. It needs to be something that's designed differently from a parking lot. So I think that was the goal, is not giving it we're seeing what a burn-up is and what it isn't. And so that does reduce the amount of freedom because there was, I think, some concern when this was at the council, some of the questions came up. It was just a fancy parking lot, is that what we're talking about? So I think what staff was trying to do is come up with an ordinance saying, yeah, if it's just a parking lot, yeah, you can't just convert that to a burn-up. It needs to be something more special than just a drive aisle within a parking lot. So that was what staff was trying to come up with the different standards to give the developer quite a bit of direction on what they need to do to create a burn-up.
And I would just add, so the discussion for this item and the need for it to come back to the Planning Commission actually came out because the City Council, they did not support staff's recommendation to allow this to count as part of the open space. So they really like the feature as a design feature in future developments, but it does not give the developer any credit towards their open space requirements. So this will be above and beyond the normal open space that's required. And so that's also why some of the parsing that staff's doing is we want it to be a functional design feature, but not just a requirement that doesn't provide overall benefit and amenities to the folks living there.
Right, so amenities of having a usable space that's safe, that a parent would judge it as safe, isn't really the criteria. I mean, however, a developer might like access or might want to have access for vehicles onto the property, maybe will be required probably to have some sort of parking, but that space that the vehicles have to transition through, I mean, that's the space that I would think, however it is designated, that's the space we want to have as multi-use and try and structure it to have either some kids be able to play football on there or be able to get out and play on small bikes. So it seems to me it's just that's the question, is how to make it feel safe and how any vehicles entering there will face a physical damage to their vehicle if they travel too fast. That would be my sort of approach to it. The other question I got perhaps on the aspect of the fire department, the safety side, does their comments become part of the process? Does it become part of the record?
So when a developer proposes a project, that does get referred to the fire department at the very beginning. So when a project comes in, like every other project, they will need to comply with the access required by the fire marshal. So that is part of every project. So that's why these standards are written, that they would basically, they're not really narrow driveways. They still need to meet their fire department for width and access. So it's to be clear that when a developer comes in, he maybe comes in with a concept that he would run that by the fire marshal, know it well in advance whether there's going to be any issues or not.
But that commentary that might come back from the fire marshal, does that become part of the public record?
Yeah, yes, it does.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So I don't have any more questions.
Thanks, Commissioner Hancock. I have a few items here. In looking at our language and standards and also looking at the many examples you provided, and thank you for that, there are a couple things that came to mind for me. One was a lot of the examples that were provided were from primarily European countries. And I assume, as you mentioned, that's because we don't see these a lot in the United States, let alone California. So exciting that we're bringing in new ideas. I think my concern there goes back to how much guidance we provide in the standard. I know usually I would say flexibility is very valuable to encourage creativity. But I think with this, I'm a little bit concerned in that if we don't provide more strict standards within the ordinance, just seeing some of the examples, it seems like it could easily go toward an alley or an alley look, as opposed to a communal space. The example that we had from the housing in East Cotati felt a little bit more bare. And when I went over there, I noticed that was very different than maybe, and I don't think this is a Vernif, but the housing over on Alder seems to have very communal roads. And one of the things I thought maybe is playing into that is what's opening up to those streets, whether it be garages or front doors or some sort of space where people are coming in and out and it's just more communal. And so that was something that stood out to me, if there was a way to provide clearer guidance that would maybe drive the developer to do that. Particularly if a developer isn't used to creating this sort of look and feel, since we don't have it much around here, it just felt to me like a little bit more structure would be helpful. Another thing that stood out to me was we talked about maybe making the road smaller and one way to help slow traffic down, which makes a lot of sense to me. Funny enough, I was thinking 24 feet, I think, is right around the standard width for a residential road. And I felt like sometimes that can feel very small and you almost don't want to walk on it because there's not enough room for a car and a person and a bike. And maybe having a requirement for a larger width would actually create more room for everyone. I'm certainly not an expert by any means, especially on how we slow traffic down. But I would think, if there were some sort of I don't know what the word is, but barriers coming out and then going back in with vegetation or landscaping, that would naturally slow people down. And maybe then having those wider streets would allow people to feel like if they're on the street, playing soccer or walking or, riding their bike, it's easy for them to veer over to the right when a car's coming and not be completely off of the street and then be able to veer back in. And so I'm not sure if that feedback is too broad, but those were just some of the concerns that came to mind to me. Was the width of the required width, and then the required minimum width, and then also if there's just any more like very clear guidance that we could provide to ensure that it's more of a VRNF communal space and less of an alley.
All those comments I understand, because that was some of the same issues staff was looking at, was trying to come up with something that is communal, and still allow some flexibility. So what I'm hearing is more strict standard. And to be clear, the 24 feet was too narrow. Is that correct?
Well, my thought was that something that had a larger minimum width would maybe open the space up more and help provide a feeling of we can walk here and drive here and ride here. Although earlier we did talk about making it more narrow to slow cars down, and that does make sense to me. So I feel like I was proven wrong there. but yeah, I just some of the pictures we saw felt, especially with buildings on both sides with very little landscaping, it felt a bit claustrophobic and almost like an alley and not very inviting to walk down. And I'm thinking if this is an ordinance where the developer is required to do it, I would hate for them to just kind of add it on without really having the thought of the idea of it being a communal space. And of course, I'm sure we could provide that feedback when we go into design review and whatnot, but it seems like if there is opportunity to just provide clear guidance on what we would be expecting, that may be helpful.
And Chair Murphy, one thing in the ordinance that maybe needs to be clear, there was a provision that states that 24 feet is a minimum, but it needs to be wider in other locations to allow for amenities like seating and other elements. So the thought was that it's not like 24 feet discontinuous, but it is something that does open up at other locations to provide those amenities that you may be talking about. Like in the example over on East Cotati, in the middle, it does open up to that little park area. It doesn't read as part of the VRNF, but it's something like that. Staff was envisioning that the 24 feet is at the minimum, that's the narrowest at any point, but it should be wider in other locations.
Mm-hmm.
Just per the chair, I think this is a time to ask staff questions, and then I think there should be an open for anything for the public, and then a board discussion, which I think some of these topics cover. Anyway, that's bringing up that point.
Thank you, Commissioner Hancock. So I think I realize the question is a bit broad there, but I think the question is if the staff has any other recommendations that would help provide reassurance that we would end up with less of an alley and more of a communal space, that would be my request. And if you have an answer to that now, that's great. And if not, that's okay as well. We could discuss it later and open it up to public comment.
Yeah, I would say staff probably does not have an answer to that question at this point.
Well, and I would just add, I do think in some cases, this actually it will serve as an alley. Or so some of the ideas that we've had is, when we were coming up with the open space standards, we talked about our own experiences of, some of these alley loaded developments, which are now kind of our design standards push you that way, where your front doors face onto the street and your garages are accessed via alleys that you don't see. And if you go visit those developments, oftentimes what happens is all the residents roll up their garage doors. They really interact and socialize, and the kids are zooming around on their bikes. And then, when the occasional car comes to use the alley to access their garage, then everybody kind of takes a break. So we do think that some alleys will be proposed to meet the VRNF standards, but then we also, to your point, don't want it to be only kind of an afterthought that is put into an alley area. We want some of the circulation areas that may front against people's front doors, or maybe have side doors or patios that access them. We want them to also be able to feel that the Vernif is an amenity, even if there's a parking space as a part of it or a drive, part of the circulation for the overall site.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, I think the answer is there's a level of confidence that through some of the other design guidance that we have within Cotati, we could easily tie that to what we're doing here and likely be able to have that requirement, even though it's not in this particular ordinance.
Absolutely.
I see. Okay, sounds good. I will just check once again before we open it to public comment that there aren't any more questions for staff. You can raise your hand if there are. Okay, then we will open it up to questions, public comment on this issue.
Eris Weaver, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, Eris Weaver. I'm a Cotati resident. I live at Frog Song, and I'm also executive director of Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition. I really like the whole idea in general, and I just love that our little tiny town is so willing to be brave and bold and experimental and do things that nobody else in the county is doing yet. So I really want to thank everyone for that. That said, I don't think that this ordinance as written and these standards go far enough. One of the things that really struck me in looking at all the photos was there was, in my mind, a huge difference between the examples in the US and UK compared to the Dutch and other parts of Europe. And that is the ones that you showed are wider and straighter. In other words, more likely to make cars drive faster. The Dutch examples, I watched a lot of videos, looked at a lot of photos online today before the meeting. They were narrow. They were more wandering. The bulb outs and the planting and all that stuff required the vehicles to kind of do a sinuous path, which slows them down. And most of the American sections did not, images did not include that, nor does the one here in Cotati. When I looked at that photo of the one here in Cotati, I thought that doesn't look like an inviting space. And part of it, it just looks like a driveway with fancy pavement on it. It's straight. And none of the houses, it was all the backs of the houses. None of the houses opened onto it. It needs to be part of people's living if you think people are going to go out and use it, as I think someone else already mentioned. So I wouldn't be surprised if that, I don't know how that one gets used, but it didn't look that inviting. I think 24 feet is too wide. If the whole point, and someone mentioned not wanting to irritate drivers for, getting impatient. Let's freaking irritate some drivers, okay? As a cyclist, I'm pretty irritated by always being the drivers getting the lion's share of resources. And if the whole point of this is to make it more friendly for pedestrians and bicyclists and more people in the street, we really need to go overboard in that direction. It needs to there needs to be something in there that requires the driving path to be curved. It needs to be narrower, and it needs to be where houses actually open out onto it, that it isn't this, the alleys in the neighborhood next to mine, are all ugly and look like the back of something you're not supposed to look at. It's where you put your trash and stuff. And I would love to see doing some of this in other streets in the city and not just limiting this to new construction. But I do think it really needs to, narrower and curvilinear so that it really does slow the cars if you really are serious about wanting people to walk and ride and play in it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment and feedback.
Sure, Murphy,
Any
that will
other
end
public
public comment.
Thank you. I am gonna open it back up now to additional comments and or questions from the commission. Commissioner Hancock?
Yes, hello. I really appreciate Eris being able to give that view, and I completely agree with it. As a bicyclist, being concerned about frustrated drivers seems really against the principles of what we're trying to do. I mean, generally, I would sort of say we're trying to be too prescriptive on some of this, that the sort of principles, I think, are, about making it a safe place. And the 4 principles that Arcata came up with, which I think were outlined in the beginning slide, are what's important, that sinuosity, having that there. I completely agree that I think the mandatory minimum width could be 17 feet. I went out and measured it on my driveway. So the idea being that, of course, the developer, whoever, or the site architect, would design it so that it works, but there's no reason why there can't be some necking at some points that really make the, that maybe allow one vehicle through, and maybe that would have to be the size of an emergency vehicle access, but it's all about designing it for the, if you like, the kids to play, and making it that the parents think that they're playing safe and that a driver isn't going to come through there and go too fast, because there's going to be these sinusoidal type things. So I would say let's reduce the 24 foot to maybe 17 feet, take off the 300-foot limit that's on there, just keep the principles of safety visible, and see it's a driveway, it's not a street, so it is about how the vehicles move from the street onto the property. As I would, anyway, I'll throw that open for discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner Hancock. Commissioner Moore?
So I just had a couple kind of concerns about the width of the street. So just where I live, the width of the street is huge. It's like 40 something feet across in L section. And everybody walks in the street. Nobody uses the sidewalk. It's very, like, everybody just walks in the street. So I think that's kind of neither here nor there on the width. When we designed McMinnis, which is over by co-housing and all those developments were put in Charles Street, it was intentionally put in with 24 narrow width of the street to slow traffic down. And yeah, not everybody loves an alleyway, but I do love an alleyway there. And I think it has slowed traffic down. We walk there quite often, and I drive in there, and it's slowed traffic down. You really have to pay attention. And again, people walk in the street. They don't really use the sidewalk there. So you have to pay attention. People walking across to the vets building, and down by the bridge. There, if anything, that would be a great test right there to do a burn of that area, because it's so small. I really like the idea, and I like the idea that we're doing better design, and we're not leaving it up to the developer to do whatever they want. In my experience, when you leave it up to a developer to do whatever they want, they do whatever they want, and they don't really do the best design. So I like the idea of having some really good design around this and what we're going to do and what we're asking for. I think this is a great concept. When I was in Europe, I walked a lot of these. I loved them. I thought they were very safe. Cars are very small in Europe. So, you have Mini Coopers, and you don't have huge SUVs and Cadillacs going through. So it makes it just a different kind of animal on that. So when I walked a lot of these smaller little alleyways and streets, they seemed just very safe, and people didn't speed as much. So anyways, I love this idea. I'm in favor of it. But I would like to have it, see it tweaked just a little bit to make it, actually just make it more design than the developer would have flexibility as. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Moore. I don't see a hand from Commissioner Lemus, so I do, is that correct, Commissioner Lemus?
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I don't have anything else to say. I said it in my first comment. It's about trying to build some criteria or elements around, like other people are saying, so developers not so open, then maybe some more defined criteria is will help for safety, I think, and for making it more a usable Warner.
Chair Murphy, you're on mute. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. I do want to go back to Commissioner Hancock, whose hand was up, but I want to summarize that what I'm hearing from all of the commissioners, I believe, is that we would like some more guidance included in the ordinance to ensure that we are creating the space that our intention is. So with that, I'll ask Commissioner Hancock if you had additional thoughts or questions.
Right. So, I think we're at the stage where we're trying to give concrete advice from the commission. And I would just ask, do we want to remove the words "to reduce driver frustration" and the full length? Do we want to have any limitation on the length of 300 feet, which is probably not likely to limit stuff in Cotati, but if there was a longer project, it would. I'm just wondering what people's thoughts are on that.
And I think the other thing thank you, Commissioner Hancock, that I heard was, in addition to the length, the minimum width, that perhaps some people had feedback on reducing the minimum width to a smaller width in order to reduce traffic speed.
Right.
Is that accurate?
Well, all I wanted to do was bring out that one item just to see if I was in the minority there. If the other three commissioners all think that that's reasonable, then it would be left. But if it's having to reduce driver frustration as a cyclist, that's not a concept I necessarily understand. But anyways, I'm just trying to do it one item at a time.
Okay. Is everyone in agreement on removing the language of reducing driver frustration? I am. Correct. Yes. Okay, I'm seeing a head nod from Commissioner Moore and Commissioner Lemus.
Thank you. And the 300 feet?
I'm okay with the 300 feet being removed, but I do think that if it was any longer, it just becomes an alleyway. It doesn't become a usable space anymore. That's my only, I don't know. Maybe I haven't seen as many. And so I would have to see more Woondrifts, but the ones I've seen are pretty small, or 300 to 400 feet.
Okay. And I have some thoughts on that, but Commissioner Lemus, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, and I think I'm okay with the 300 feet as well, as long as there's interjections kind of along the way, depending on the different elements that will be used, But I don't know if we were going to talk about width now or
I will absolutely come back to you, Commissioner Lemus, when we get to the width conversation. I had a follow-up question for staff on this then. For the 300 feet, could you remind me, I believe we didn't have precedent for it, but we felt like that was a reasonable length. Could you remind us again where we came up with the 300 feet?
The city of Anchorage, Alaska, they've developed some standards for private streets, and that was a standard they came up with. That they use for 300 feet. That's what I know about the 300 feet. So other cities using it, and so staff included it.
Okay, thank you. With the minimal benchmarking, and that's to no one's fault, because I know that we don't see this much here. I don't have a a preference on, you know, minimum of 300 or maximum of 300. So I would be comfortable keeping it as is. How does the rest of the commission feel about that? Keeping the 300-foot language that we currently have in the ordinance.
I think I'm fine with it, but you know, when you say it's just one city, Anchorage, Alaska, and then there's other cities, what are the other cities?
Most of these standards, there is no cookie cutter approach. Most cities have not adopted standards for Vooners. It's all case by case. The only city I found that had any standards for Vooners in the U.S. was Anchorage, Alaska.
And so I would just add, we saw several examples of new projects in multiple states proposing them, but no city had kind of mandated it other than Anchorage and then created standards around it. To address this, one kind of flexible language could be just should seek to limit but not require it. So that way you're providing some direction to the developer, but also it gets to some of the flexibility issues that we've talked about.
How would thank you, that's very helpful. How would the commission feel about adding the language should seek to limit? I see a nod from Commissioner Moore, a thumbs up from Commissioner Hancock, and a nod from Commissioner Lemus. This is all for the record.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay. Our third item is in regard to the width. And we have had discussions on the 24-foot minimum versus a smaller width minimum in an effort to reduce traffic. Do any of the commissioners have questions or comments on that? Commissioner Lemus?
Yeah, I think right now they're requesting 24 feet width. But I think a lot would depend when we're talking about safety is the emergency vehicles. Like what is the requirement for access? You know, I think that would be important for me in making a decision on the width for this.
So maybe Director House can confirm, but I believe typically it's 20 feet width for fire equipment. Does that sound right, Noah?
You know, I've seen several different, it depends on whether it's two-way traffic or one-way traffic. Also, there's individual circumstances. We would, as a part of this for new development, we would require the traffic engineer of the project to provide some direction and kind of input on the design. So if the commission, I mean, I'm struggling because we also have some street standards that we would look to inform the design of these, even though they are private streets. So a lot of it's going to depend on if it's single, you know, one-way traffic versus two-way traffic. I think the EVA access and input from public safety, but 20 feet would be a safe width, definitely. And then we would, what I'm hearing is to provide some more direction regarding curvilinear design and also kind of features that interject into that width to provide a pedestrian refuge, those types of things.
Yes, I think that's accurate. Commissioner Moore, did you have a question or comment on that?
I just know that, like I said, just the width of the streets on McMinnis are 24. If anybody's ever driven those, they're pretty narrow. They're very narrow both ways. So I couldn't imagine bringing them down to 20 feet with parking even on one side of that street. So that would be my thing is 24 feet would be the very minimum.
I appreciate that feedback. Commissioner Hancock?
Yeah, I mean, I cycle up McMinnis a lot, and it is a public street versus a driveway. And all really asking on here or suggesting on here is that the design criteria, should there be a narrow access, which, you know, can happen, is that it would be, you know, I would go with the 20 feet, that it be accessible for a emergency vehicle, but not necessarily for two local, you know, residents to be able to pass each other. That aspect of residents paying attention. And I've had it on a lot of streets in the past, much narrow public streets where basically you can see ahead, there's only one vehicle that's going to get through. And you see an oncoming vehicle, so you pull over into a place to let them pass. So it's just that concept of a minimum fitting within it, not necessarily that that's what will happen. I mean, we're basically saying by something that we haven't really discussed, but I go with it, that the 100 square foot per unit really will drive what the developer has to do to make the space there. And that certainly in my book, from an act of transportation, from encouraging people to get out and walk, any space that's on a project that is shared with vehicles, from the point of view of a driveway vehicle, not a street, it should be multi-use and should be very, really inform the driver that they can proceed with caution. So I'm just really emphasizing that multi-use aspect for any space that has where vehicles can transition through. I think we come from a driver-dominated culture where we think all the time of vehicles and blacktop, and that's what's got us into a lot of trouble. So just my input would be thumbs up 20 feet, but I we'll go with the commission if everybody else wants to go with what we currently have.
Thank you, Commissioner Hancock. Any other thoughts on the width? And then I think we will need to get everyone's feedback to determine what we move forward with. Okay. I believe Commissioner Hancock, you're in support of 20 feet. Commissioner Moore, I don't want to speak for you, so I just want to confirm what you're in support of.
24.
24. Commissioner Lemus?
It depends on emergency vehicle, being able to use so otherwise 24 feet, but smaller or narrower if an emergency vehicle safely get through there.
And is it helpful? I believe what Joel did provide us information on was that 20 feet is his understanding of what would be required for an emergency vehicle. I'm not sure if that changes your thoughts on that at all.
So even with the turns and different, if they put in elements of 20 feet would still be enough?
They typically would need 20 feet free and clear of any parking or other, planters or anything. Typically that's a free and clear width. So the thought of the 24 feet, it would allow for them to get through. Maybe some other amenities might be in that 24 feet, as long as they had the 20 feet clear to drive through. So that was one reason staff proposed 24 feet and not 20. So if it's 20 feet minimum, that's pretty much all going to be some kind of pavement. That's not going to allow them room for planters or seating within that 20 feet. So the 24 feet seemed like it would allow in those some situations would allow some amenities or something else in that area. So that was why there was the minimum should be no less than 24 feet. In other cases, will need to be wider for amenities, but that's where staff came up with the 24 feet.
Well, then I would go with the 24 feet because I wouldn't want to sacrifice the amenities that wouldn't be needed for it to be a winner.
Thank you, Commissioner Lemus. I will support the 24 feet as well. And I really appreciate the in-depth conversation about this. I know we're trying to find the right ways to set specific standards to make this the best space possible. I have some additional thoughts, but I do want to make sure I've heard all the feedback from the commission here. So I will open it up to any other questions, comments, thoughts from the commissioners. Commissioner Hancock?
Yeah, just to say I really like it. I like that we're actually doing it. And it's about visualizing that shared usage. I would definitely like to see the living street portion of it be the concrete lattice pavers. There are some examples in Cotati which have been in the ground 40 years. I'm happy to show people where they are, and also in Roanoke Park. So that would allow kids to play on their bicycles and everything, allow water to infiltrate as well. And yeah, it's great to see it. And I think it's trimming some of it in some areas, like I've been sort of suggesting, but I think it's the driving force in here, the real sort of context for creating some wind earth is what this 100 square feet per dwelling unit that would be required. So whether or not there's only minimums of the street being required, but the 100 square feet would require the larger area, and that would be where much more of the slowdown would appear, or the ability to get off the street. So anyway, it's great. Thumbs up. It's great to see it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hancock. Commissioner Moore? Thank you, Commissioner Moore. Commissioner Lemus?
Oh, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree wholeheartedly. This is really exciting to see something new coming into the community. And I think that our community is heavily focused on pedestrian safety and bicycle safety. So this is one more step toward that. I don't want to be too stringent in the guidance that we provide, because I think flexibility is key. But I really hope that when we see this in some of the design reviews that come before the commission in the future, that we see some great landscaping, plenty of space, open spaces and buildings coming onto the road, less of that alleyway, less of the small landscaping portions, and much broader. That really helps create a nice transition between where the cars are driving and where pedestrians and bicyclists and other will be walking and using the space as well. So I'm hopeful that we will see that, and I'm absolutely in support of this. And so with that, I will ask if anyone would like to, sorry, was there a question? Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, so I would like to move on to the resolution. And ask if anyone, I'm going to pull it up here so that we have it. Okay, do I have anyone who would like to start by supporting the resolution?
I'll make a motion.
Thank you.
Chair Murphy. Make a motion to approve resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Cotati recommending the City Council adopt amendments to Title 17 Land Use of the Cotati Municipal Code to establish standards and regulations regarding to the development of burners, living streets, multiple use zones within multi-family projects, and horizontal mixed use developments and other private development projects by adding section F to chapter 17 with the language that was included with the Planning Commission.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
And I second it.
Thank you. Can we have a vote or a roll call?
Commissioner Hancock?
Yes.
Commissioner Moore?
Yes.
Vice Chair Lemus?
Yes.
Chair Murphy?
Yes. Okay, thank you very much. That was great discussion and wonderful presentation. Thank you very much, Joel. We will move into the next item, which is reports by staff.
Thank you, Chair Murphy. Just wanted to give a brief update to the commission. On the 26th of October, the City Council did adopt the design standards that you all spent so much time on with Senior Planner Galbraith. And so as a part of that discussion, they asked that the burners be pulled out, and that's how we're here. So those moved forward, they're adopted. And staff has had an SB 330 project filed. So that's different than some of the SB 35 projects we discussed, but just know it was very good timing with getting those done. So thank you very much to Joel and the commission for moving that along, and the council ultimately being able to adopt them and to have that in place ahead of the development coming in. It's just a concept application, so I don't want to spend any time on it, but I'll definitely update the commission if it chooses to move forward. Similarly, in that same meeting, the city manager presented an item asking the city council to kind of reevaluate the priorities that we set during strategic planning back in the spring, because a number of kind of other issues that were pressing had come up in the community. And so we really just wanted to allow the council and the citizens to provide an additional kind of look back at what we had said we were going to spend our resources on for the fiscal year, reevaluate that, and provide some additional direction. And so out of that discussion, the council was able to kind of shift some of the staff work with regards to some of the housing element onto the housing element consultants themselves, and put a pause on some of the other work that we had identified as needed. But, you know, the timing of it was a little bit more flexible. And in place of that, they asked staff to prioritize a gas station ban or a fossil fuel ban, in keeping with what the city of Petaluma has done, and I think city of Sebastopol is moving forward with. And basically most of the other communities in the county are anticipating moving forward with a similar ban. So the commission can expect to see that coming, being brought by staff in the relatively near term. And similarly, to move forward with making some changes to the current regulations regarding agricultural uses throughout the city. There's a lot of general plan policies that direct us to allow agriculture essentially in every zoning district in some form, whether it's a community garden or full-on crop production. But our zoning code doesn't implement that. And so it had come to an issue for some larger parcels that are zoned residential, but wanting to kind of maintain or create some agricultural activities. And then also the Folletti Ranch rezoning, which is currently zoned residential, but we need to zone it in keeping with how it's being used and will be used given the deed restriction that we put on it with the Ag and Open Space District. So those two things kind of coalesced around some priorities being shifted, and so the commission should anticipate seeing an urban agriculture zoning code text amendment along with the Folletti Ranch rezoning coming in the relatively near term. That's all that we have that's pressing. We do continue to see a significant amount of developer interest, but not a lot of projects being filed yet, but we do anticipate a fairly busy spring and early summer for the commission. And that concludes my report.
Thank you.
Through the chair, would we want to go back to the approval of one set of minutes that I think we can do?
Yes, thank you for the reminder on that. So I will circle back to item C. And if we could get some guidance on the minutes that we have access to approve today per our attendance.
Yeah, so I think as Commissioner Hancock's probably already figured out, the meeting minutes of September 20th are ready and able to be voted on. We have a quorum on those. Unfortunately, we do not have a quorum on the meeting minutes from September 7th, unless Vice Chair Lemus or Commissioner Moore happen to review that meeting. And similarly with the meeting of June 21st, unless Chair Murphy or Commissioner Hancock have reviewed that meeting, which is, we discussed the La Plaza View, the Reds recovery room design review for the dispensary, and then also the design standards. Unless those have been reviewed, then we need to move those to a different agenda when Commissioner Rodriguez is here.
I would be comfortable moving the June 21st and September 7th minutes to our next meeting. And we will move forward with approving the September 20th, the September 20th, 2021 minutes. Can I get a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Commissioner Hancock. And a second?
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Lemus. And do we need a roll call on that?
Yeah. Commissioner Hancock?
Yes.
Commissioner Moore?
Yes.
Vice Chair Lemus?
Yes.
Chair Murphy?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. We will circle back to item H, which is reports by the commission. Would anyone like to provide a report? Commissioner Hancock?
Yes, I seem to be putting my hand up a lot here and stuff. Yes, I went to the Community Alliance with Family Farmers, CAF, that was held last Friday. That some of this discussion was about. Very nicely done up on the hills, and there were quite a few interesting people there. David Rabbit that I recognized, and then I was chatting with this guy, Chris Corsi, and said, you know, so you at Santa Rosa Council? But I got that wrong. He's on the supervisors. So the bit of my mistake there, but the core, I think, of what they were talking about was that this urban agriculture, the need to support, per the state code, for urban farmers to easily grow and sell nuts, fruits, and vegetables. And it just turns out there's a real matrix of problems with some places not allowing, seems like in Cotati as well, not allowing either the cultivation of some of those fruits, nuts, and vegetables, or the selling of it. And there was also somebody there from Bounty Farms in Petaluma that was talking a lot about what they've done, the urban benefits. So I think it's really easy to underestimate just the value of having a farm within the city. We've got it with Folletti Ranch downtown, which attracts a lot of interest. But if there's a private person who's doing some farming, you know, just the real benefit of doing that. And Merlin, who's the owner, is very hospitable. I think that property has a long history. I've certainly known some of the people up there of being very friendly and accessible, so a real sort of benefit to the community. There was also somebody from the UC Extension, Julia Kim, who was talking about just, again, what the benefits are, and also that, you know, we really, perhaps, the way I understood it, want to focus on the fruits, nuts, and vegetables for an urban farm, other than perhaps strictly business-orientated cash crops, grapes, hemp, and that type of thing. So I think there is a differentiation, and we can do that with a structured approach. So I hope that, look forward to that coming forward. And it was a gorgeous morning to be out there seeing how everything was growing, the farmers and what they're doing, what they're talking about up there. So it was very good.
Thank you, Commissioner Hancock. Any other reports from the commission? Okay, great. Then we will move into item I, which is items received after the agenda was posted. Do we have any items?
No items are received.
Thank you. With that, I will tell everyone to have a wonderful Monday evening, and we will adjourn. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.